Side 4, Valis, by Philip K. Dick, continuing on page 117. I'll quote Heraclitus on my own, without getting Fat's permission. Time is a child at play, playing draughts. A child's is the kingdom. Christ, what does this mean? Edward Hussey about this passage. Here, as probably in Anaximander, time is a name for God, with an etymological suggestion of his eternity. The infinitely old divinity is a child playing a board game as he moves the cosmic pieces in combat according to rule. Jesus Christ, what are we dealing with here? Where are we, and when are we, and who are we? How many people, in how many places, at how many times? Pieces on a board, moved by the infinitely old divinity who is a child. Back to the cognac bottle. Cognac calms me down. Sometimes, especially after I've spent an evening talking to Fat, I get freaked and need something to calm me. I have the dreadful sense that he is into something real and awfully frightening. Personally, I don't want to break any new theological or philosophical ground, but I had to meet Horselover Fat. I had to get to know him and share his harebrained ideas based on his peculiar encounter with God knows what. With ultimate reality, maybe. Whatever it was alive, and it thought. And in no way did it resemble us, despite the quote from 1 John 3, 1-2. Xenophanes was right. One God there is, in no way like mortal creatures, either in bodily form or in the thought of his mind. Isn't it an oxymoron to say, I am not myself? Isn't this a verbal contradiction, a statement semantically meaningless? Fat turned out to be Thomas, and I, upon studying the information in my dream, conclude that I am my own father, married to my mother when she was young, before my own birth. I think the cryptic mention that now and then 1 or 2 wizards are born is supposed to tell me something. A sufficiently advanced technology would seem to us to be a form of magic. Arthur C. Clarke has pointed that out. A wizard deals with magic. Ergo, a wizard is someone in possession of a highly sophisticated technology, one which baffles us. Someone is playing a board game with time, someone we can't see. It is not God. That is an archaic name given to this entity by societies in the past, and by people now who are locked into anachronistic thinking. We need a new term, but what we are dealing with is not new. Horselover Fat is able to travel through time, travel back thousands of years. The 3-eyed people probably live in the far future. They are our descendants, highly evolved, and it is probably their technology which permitted Fat to do his time traveling. In point of fact, Fat's master personality may not lie in the past, but ahead of us, but it expressed itself outside of him in the form of zebra. I am saying that the St. Elmo's fire which Fat recognized as alive and sentient probably abreacted back to this time period and is one of our own children. 8. I did not think I should tell Fat that I thought his encounter with God was in fact an encounter with himself from the far future, himself so evolved, so changed, that he had become no longer a human being. Fat had remembered back to the stars, and had encountered a being ready to return to the stars, and several selves along the way, several points along the line. All of them are the same person. Entry 13 in the tractate. Pascal said, all history is one immortal man who continually learns. This is the immortal one whom we worship without knowing his name. He lived a long time ago, but he is still alive, and the head Apollo is about to return. The name changes. On some level, Fat guessed the truth. He had encountered his past selves and his future selves. 2 future selves, an early on one, the 3-eyed people, and then Zebra, who is discorporate. Time somehow got abolished for him, and the recapitulation of selves along the linear time axis caused the multitude of selves to laminate together into a common entity. Out of the lamination of selves, zebra, which is supra or trans-temporal, came into existence. Pure energy, pure living information, immortal, benign, intelligent, and helpful. The essence of the rational human being. In the center of an irrational universe governed by an irrational mind stands rational man, Horselover Fat being just one example. The inbreaking deity that Fat encountered in 1974 was himself. However, Fat seemed happy to believe that he had met God. After some thought, I decided not to tell him my views. After all, I might be wrong. It all had to do with time. Time can be overcome, Mircea Eliade wrote. That's what it's all about. The great mystery of Eleusis, of the Orphics, of the early Christians, of Serapis, of the Greco-Roman mystery religions, of Hermes Trismegistus, of the Renaissance Hermetic alchemists, of the Rose-Cross Brotherhood, of Apollonius of Tyana, of Simon Magus, of Asclepius, of Paracelsus, of Bruno, consists of the abolition of time. The techniques are there. Dante discusses them in the Comedy. It has to do with the loss of amnesia. When forgetfulness is lost, true memory spreads out backward and forward, into the past and into the future, and also, oddly, into alternate universes. It is orthogonal as well as linear. This is why Elijah could be said correctly to be immortal. He had entered the upper realm, as Fat calls it, and is no longer subject to time. Time equals what the ancients called astral determinism. The purpose of the mysteries was to free the initiate from astral determinism, which roughly equals fate. About this, Fat wrote in his tractate, Entry 48. 2 realms there are, upper and lower. The upper, derived from hyper-universe 1, or Yang, form 1 of Parmenides, is sentient and volitional. The lower realm, or Yin, form 2 of Parmenides, is mechanical, driven by blind, efficient cause, deterministic, and without intelligence, since it emanates from a dead source. In ancient times it was termed astral determinism. We are trapped, by and large, in the lower realm, but are, through the sacraments, by means of the plasmate, extricated. Until astral determinism is broken, we are not even aware of it, so occluded are we. The empire never ended. Siddhartha, the Buddha, remembered all his past lives. This is why he was given the title of Buddha, which means the enlightened one. From him, the knowledge of achieving this passed to Greece and shows up in the teachings of Pythagoras, who kept much of this occult mystical gnosis secret. His pupil, Empedocles, however, broke off from the Pythagorean brotherhood and went public. Empedocles told his friends privately that he was Apollo. He, too, like the Buddha and Pythagoras, could remember his past lives. What they did not talk about was their ability to remember future lives. The three-eyed people who Fat saw represented himself at an enlightened stage of his evolving development through his various lifetimes. In Buddhism, it's called the superhuman divine eye, Dibba-kaku, the power to see the passing away and rebirth of beings. Gautama, the Buddha, Siddhartha, attained it during his middle watch, 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. In his first watch, 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., he gained the knowledge of all, repeat, all his former existences, Pubeni Vasunasatinana. I did not tell Fat this, but technically he had become a Buddha. It did not seem to me like a good idea to let him know. After all, if you are a Buddha, you should be able to figure it out for yourself. It strikes me as an interesting paradox that a Buddha, an enlightened one, would be unable to figure out, even after 4.5 years, that he had become enlightened. Fat had become totally bogged down in his enormous exegesis, trying futilely to determine what had happened to him. He resembled more a hit-and-run accident victim than a Buddha. Holy fuck, as Kevin would have put it, about the encounter with Zebra. What was that? No wimpy hype passed muster before Kevin's eyes. He considered himself the hawk and the hype the rabbit. He had little use for the exegesis, but remained Fat's good friend. Kevin operated on the principle, condemn the deed, not the doer. These days, Kevin felt fine. After all, his negative opinion of Sherry had proven correct. This brought him and Fat closer together. Kevin knew her for what she was, her cancer notwithstanding. In the final analysis, the fact that she was dying mattered to him not in the least. He had mulled it over and concluded that the cancer was a scam. Fat's obsessive idea these days, as he worried more and more about Sherry, was that the Savior would soon be reborn, or had been already. Somewhere in the world he walked, or soon would walk, the ground once more. What did Fat intend to do when Sherry died? Maurice had shouted that at him in the form of a question. Would he die, too? Not at all. Fat, pondering and writing and doing research and receiving dribs and drabs of messages from Zebra during hypnagogic states and in dreams, and attempting to salvage something from the wreck of his life, had decided to go in search of the Savior. He would find him wherever he was. This was the mission, the divine purpose, which Zebra had placed on him in March 1974. The mild yoke, the burden light. Fat, a holy man now, would become a modern-day magus. All he lacked was a clue, some hint as to where to seek. Zebra would tell him, eventually. The clue would come from God. This was the whole purpose of Zebra's theophany, to send Fat on his way. Our friend David, upon being told of this, asked, "Will it be Christ?" thus showing his Catholicism. "It is a fifth Savior," Fat said enigmatically. After all, Zebra had referred to the coming of the Savior in several, and in a sense conflicting, ways, as Saint Sophia, who was Christ, as the head Apollo, as the Buddha or Siddhartha. Being eclectic in terms of his theology, Fat listed a number of saviors: the Buddha, Zoroaster, Jesus, and Abu al-Qasim Muhammad ibn Abd Allah Abd al-Muttalib ibn Hashim, i.e. Muhammad. Sometimes he also listed Mani. Therefore the next savior would be number 5 by the abridged list, or number 6 by the longer list. At certain times, Fat also included Asclepius, which when added to the longer list would make the next savior number 7. In any case, this forthcoming savior would be the last. He would sit as king and judge over all nations and people. The sifting bridge of Zoroastrianism had been set up, by means of which good souls, those of light, became separated from bad souls, those of darkness. Ma'at had put her feather in the balance to be weighed against the heart of each man in judgment, as Osiris, the judge, sat. It was a busy time. Fat intended to be present, perhaps to hand the book of life to the supreme judge, the Ancient of Days mentioned in the book of Daniel. We all pointed out to Fat that hopefully the book of life, in which the names of all who were saved had been inscribed, would prove too heavy for one man to lift. A winch and power crane would be necessary. Fat wasn't amused. "Wait till the Supreme Judge sees my dead cat," Kevin said. "You and your goddamn dead cat," I said. "We're tired of hearing about your dead cat." After listening to Fat disclose his sly plans to seek out the Savior, no matter how far he had to travel to find him, I realized the obvious. Fat actually was in search of the dead girl Gloria, for whose death he considered himself responsible. He had totally blended his religious life and goals with his emotional life and goals. For him, Savior stood for lost friend. He hoped to be reunited with her, but this side of the grave. If he couldn't go to her on the other side, he would instead find her here. So, although he was no longer suicidal, he was still nuts. But this seemed to me to be an improvement. Thanatos was losing out to Eros. As Kevin put it, maybe Fat'll get laid by some fox somewhere along the way. By the time Fat took off on his sacred quest, he would be searching for 2 dead girls, Gloria and Sherry. This updated version of the Grail saga made me wonder if equally erotic underpinnings had motivated the Grail knights at Monsalvat, the castle where Parsifal wound up. Wagner says in his text that only those who the Grail itself calls find their way there. The blood of Christ on the cross had been caught in the same cup from which he had drunk at the Last Supper, so literally it had wound up containing his blood. In essence, the blood, not the Grail, summoned the knights. The blood never died. Like Zebra, the contents of the Grail were a plasma, or, as Fat termed it, plasmate. Probably Fat had it down somewhere in his exegesis that Zebra equaled plasmate, equaled the sacred blood of the crucified Christ. The spilled blood of the girl broken and drying on the pavement outside the Oakland Synanon building called to Fat, who, like Parsifal, was a complete fool. That's what the word Parsifal is supposed to mean in Arabic. It's supposed to have been derived from fal parsi, an Arabic word meaning pure fool. This, of course, isn't the actual case, although in the opera Parsifal, Kundry addresses Parsifal this way. The name Parsifal is in fact derived from Percival, which is just a name. However, one point of interest remains. Via Persia, the Grail is identified with the pre-Christian lapis exilix, which is a magical stone. This stone shows up in later Hermetic alchemy as the agent by which human metamorphosis is achieved. On the basis of Fat's concept of interspecies symbiosis, the human being cross-bonded with Zebra or the Logos or plasmate to become a homoplasmate, I can see a certain continuity in all this. Fat believed himself to have cross-bonded with Zebra. Therefore, he had already become that which the Hermetic alchemists sought. It would be natural, then, for him to seek out the Grail. He would be finding his friend, himself, and his home. Kevin held the role of the evil magician Klingzor by his continual lampooning of Fat's idealistic aspirations. Fat, according to Kevin, was horny. In Fat, Thanatos, death, fought it out with Eros, which Kevin identified not with life, but with getting laid. This probably isn't far off. I mean Kevin's basic description of the dialectical struggle surging back and forth inside Fat's mind. Part of Fat desired to die, and part desired life. Thanatos can assume any form it wishes. It can kill Eros, the life drive, and then simulate it. Once Thanatos does this to you, you are in big trouble. You suppose you are driven by Eros, but it is Thanatos wearing a mask. I hoped Fat hadn't gotten into this place. I hoped his desire to seek out and find the Savior stemmed from Eros. The true Savior, or the true God for that matter, carries life with him. He is life. Any Savior or God who brings death is nothing but Thanatos wearing a Savior mask. This is why Jesus identified himself as the true Savior, even when he didn't want to so identify himself, by his healing miracles. The people knew what healing miracles pointed to. There is a wonderful passage at the very end of the Old Testament where this matter is clarified. God says, "But for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness shall rise with healing in his wings, and you shall break loose like calves released from the stall." In a sense, Fat hoped that the Savior would heal what had become sick, restore what had been broken. On some level, he actually believed that the dead girl Gloria could be restored to life. This is why Sherry's unrelieved agony, her growing cancer, baffled him and defeated his spiritual hopes and beliefs. According to his system, as put forth in his exegesis, based on his encounter with God, Sherry should have been made well. Fat was in search of a very great deal. Although technically he could understand why Sherry had cancer, spiritually he could not. In fact, Fat could not really make out why Christ, the Son of God, had been crucified. Pain and suffering made no sense to Fat. He could not fit it into the grand design. Therefore, he reasoned, the existence of such dreadful afflictions pointed to irrationality in the universe, an affront to reason. Beyond doubt, Fat was serious about his proposed quest. He had squirreled away almost $20,000 in his savings account. "Don't make fun of him," I said to Kevin one day. "This is important to him." His eyes gleaming with customary cynical mockery, Kevin said, Ripping off a piece of ass is important to me, too. Come off it, I said. You're not funny. Kevin merely continued to grin. A week later, Sherry died. Now, as I had foreseen, Fat had 2 deaths on his conscience. He had been unable to save either girl. When you are Atlas, you must carry a heavy load, and if you drop it, a lot of people suffer. An entire world of people, an entire world of suffering. This now lay over Fat spiritually rather than physically, this load. Tied to him, the 2 corpses cried for rescue, cried even though they had died. The cries of the dead are terrible indeed. You should not try to hear them. What I feared was a return by Fat to suicide, and if that failed, then another stretch in the rubber lockup. To my surprise, when I dropped by Fat's apartment, I found him composed. "I'm going," he told me. "On your quest?" "You got it," Fat said. "Where?" "I don't know. I'll just start going and Zebra will guide me." I had no motivation to try to talk him out of it. What did his alternatives consist of? Sitting by himself in the apartment he and Sherry had lived in together? Listening to Kevin mock the sorrows of the world? Worst of all, he could spend his time listening to David prattle about how God brings good out of evil. If anything were to put Fat in the rubber lockup, it would be finding himself caught in a crossfire between Kevin and David, the stupid and pious and credulous versus the cynically cruel. And what could I add? Sherry's death had torn me down, too, had deconstructed me into basic parts, like a toy disassembled back to what had arrived in the gaily colored kit. I felt like saying, "Take me along, Fat. Show me the way home." While Fat and I sat there together, grieving, the phone rang. It was Beth, wanting to be sure Fat knew that he had fallen behind a week in his child support payment. As he hung up the phone, Fat said to me, "My ex-wives are descended from rats." "You've got to get out of here," I said. "Then you agree I should go?" "Yes," I said. "I've got enough money to go anywhere in the world. I've thought of China. I've thought, where is the least likely place he would be born? A communist country like China. Or France." "Why France?" I asked. "I've always wanted to see France." "Then go to France," I said. "What will you do?" Fat murmured. "Pardon?" "I was thinking about that American Express Traveler's Checks TV ad. What will you do? What will you do?" That's how I feel right now. They're right. I said, "I like the one where the middle-aged man says, 'I had $600 in that wallet. It's the worst thing that ever happened to me in my life.'" If that's the worst thing that ever happened to him. "Yeah," Fat said, nodding. "He's led a sheltered life." I knew what vision had conjured itself up in Fat's mind, the vision of the dying girls, either broken on impact or burst open from within. I shivered and felt myself like weeping. "She suffocated," Fat said finally in a low voice. "She just fucking suffocated. She couldn't breathe any longer." "I'm sorry," I said. "You know what the doctor said to me to cheer me up?" Fat said. "There are worse diseases than cancer." "Did he show you slides?" We both laughed. When you are nearly crazy with grief, you laugh at what you can. "Let's walk down to Sombrero Street," I said. That was a good restaurant and bar where we all liked to go. "I'll buy you a drink." We walked down to Main Street and seated ourselves in the bar at Sombrero Street. "Where's that little brown-haired lady you used to come in here with?" the waitress asked Fat as she served us our drinks. "In Cleveland," Fat said. We both started to laugh again. The waitress remembered Sherry. It was too awful to take seriously. "I knew this woman," I said to Fat as we drank, "and I was talking about a dead cat of mine, and I said, 'Well, he's at rest in perpetuity.' And she immediately said, completely seriously, 'My cat is buried in Glendale.' We all chimed in and compared the weather in Glendale compared to the weather in perpetuity. Both Fat and I were laughing so hard now that other people stared at us. "We have to knock this off," I said, calming down. "Isn't it colder in perpetuity?" Fat said. Yes, but there's less smog. Fat said, maybe that's where I'll find him. Who? I said. Him, the fifth savior. Do you remember the time at your apartment, I said, when Sherry was starting chemotherapy and her hair was falling out? Yeah, the cat's water dish. She was standing by the cat's water dish, and her hair kept falling into the water dish, and the poor cat was puzzled. What the hell is this? Fat said, quoting what the cat would have said could it talk. Here in my water dish. He grinned, but no joy could be seen in his grin. Neither of us could be funny any longer, even between us. We need Kevin to cheer us up, Fat said. On second thought, he murmured, maybe we don't. We just have to keep on trucking, I said. Phil, Fat said, if I don't find him, I'm going to die. I know, I said. It was true. The Savior stood between Horselover Fat and annihilation. I'm programmed to self-destruct, Fat said. The button has been pressed. The sensations that you feel, I began. They're rational, Fat said, in terms of the situation. It's true. This is not insanity. I have to find him, wherever he is, or die. Well, then, I'll die too, I said, if you do. That's right, Fat said. He nodded. You got it. You can't exist without me, and I can't exist without you. We're in this together. Fuck. What kind of life is this? Why do these things happen? You said it yourself. The universe... I'll find him, Fat said. He drank his drink and set the empty glass down and stood up. Let's go back to my apartment. I want you to hear the new Linda Ronstadt record, Living in the USA. It's real good. As we left the bar, I said, Kevin says Ronstadt's washed up. Pausing at the door out, Fat said, Kevin is washed up. He's going to whip that goddamn dead cat out from under his coat on Judgment Day, and they're going to laugh at him like he laughs at us. That's what he deserves, a great judge exactly like himself. That's not a bad theological idea, I said. You find yourself facing yourself. You think you'll find him? The Savior? Yeah, I'll find him. If I run out of money, I'll come home and work some more and go look again. He has to be somewhere. Zebra said so. And Thomas, inside my head, he knew it. He remembered Jesus just having been there a little while ago, and he knew he'd be back. They were all joyful, completely joyful, making preparations to welcome him back. The bridegroom back. It was so goddamn festive, Phil. Totally joyful and exciting, and everyone running around. They were running out of the Black Iron prison and just laughing and laughing. They had fucking blown it up, Phil. The whole prison. Blew it up and got out of there. Running and laughing and totally, totally happy. And I was one of them. You will be again, I said. I will be, Fat said, when I find him. But until then I won't be. I can't be. There's no way. He halted on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets. I miss him, Phil. I fucking miss him. I want to be with him. I want to feel his arm around me. Nobody else can do that. I saw him, sort of, and I want to see him again. That love, that warmth, that delight on his part that it's me, seeing me, being glad it's me, recognizing me. He recognized me. I know, I said awkwardly. Nobody knows what it's like, Fat said, to have seen him and then not to see him. Almost 5 years now. 5 years of... He gestured. Of what? And what before that? You'll find him, I said. I have to, Fat said, or I am going to die. And you too, Phil. And we know it. The leader of the Grail Knights, Amfortas, has a wound which will not heal. Klingzor has wounded him with the spear which pierced Christ's side. Later, when Klingzor hurls the spear at Parsifal, the pure fool catches the spear, which has stopped in mid-air, and holds it up, making the sign of the cross with it, at which Klingsor and his entire castle vanish. They were never there in the first place. They were a delusion, what the Greeks call dokos, what the Indians call the veil of Maya. There is nothing Parsifal cannot do. At the end of the opera, Parsifal touches the spear to Amfortas's wound. The wound heals. Amfortas, who only wanted to die, is healed. Very mysterious words are repeated, which I never understood, although I can read German. Gesegnet sei dein Leiden, das Mitleids höchste Kraft und reinsten Wissens Macht den Sagen Toren gab. This is one of the keys to the story of Parsifal, the pure fool who abolishes the delusion of the magician Klingsor and his castle, and heals Amfortas's wound. But what does it mean? May your suffering be blessed, which gave the timid fool pity's highest power and purest knowledge's might. I don't know what this means. However, I know that in our case, the pure fool, Horselover Fat, himself had the wound which would not heal, and the pain that goes with it. All right, the wound is caused by the spear which pierced the Saviour's side, and only that same spear can heal it. In the opera, after Amfortas is healed, the shrine is at last opened. It has been closed for a long time, and the Grail is revealed, at which point heavenly voices say, Erlösung dem Erlöser, which is very strange because it means the Redeemer redeemed. In other words, Christ has saved himself. There's a technical term for this, salvator salvandus, the saved Savior. The fact that in the discharge of his task the eternal messenger must himself assume the lot of incarnation and cosmic exile, and the further fact that, at least in the Iranian variety of the myth, he is in a sense identical with those he calls the once lost parts of the divine self, give rise to the moving idea of the saved Savior, Salvator Salvandus. My source is reputable, the Encyclopedia of Philosophy, Macmillan Publishing Company, New York, 1967, in the article on Gnosticism. I am trying to see how this applies to Fat. What is this pity's highest power? In what way does pity have the power to heal a wound? And can Fat feel pity for himself, and so heal his own wound? Would this, then, make Horselover Fat the Savior himself, the Savior saved? That seems to be the idea which Wagner expresses. The Savior idea is Gnostic in origin. How did it get into Parsifal? Maybe Fat was searching for himself when he set out in search of the Savior, to heal the wound made by first the death of Gloria and then the death of Sherry. But what in our modern world is the analog for Klingsor's huge stone castle? That which Fat calls the Empire? The Black Iron Prison? Is the Empire, which never ended, an illusion? The words which Parsifal speaks, which caused the huge stone castle and Klingsor himself to disappear, are, Mit diesem Zeichen bahn ich deinen Zauber. With this sign I abolish your magic. The sign, of course, is the sign of the cross. Fat's Savior is Fat himself, as I already figured out. Zebra is all the selves along the linear time axis, laminated into one supra- or trans-temporal self, which cannot die, and which has come back to save Fat. But I don't dare tell Fat that he is searching for himself. He is not ready to entertain such a notion, because like the rest of us, he seeks an external savior. Pity's highest power is just bullshit. Pity has no power. Fat felt vast pity for Gloria, and vast pity for Sherry, and it didn't do a damn bit of good in either case. Something was lacking. Everyone knows this. Everyone who has gazed down helplessly at a sick or dying human, or a sick or dying animal, felt terrible pity, overwhelming pity, and realized that this pity, however great it might be, is totally useless. Something else healed the wound. For me and David and Kevin, this was a serious matter, this wound in Fat which would not heal, but which had to be healed and would be healed if Fat found the Savior. Did some magic scene lie in the future where Fat would come to his senses, recognize that he was the Savior, and thereby automatically be healed? Don't bet on it. I wouldn't. Parsifal is one of those corkscrew artifacts of culture in which you get the subjective sense that you've learned something from it, something valuable or even priceless, but on closer inspection you suddenly begin to scratch your head and say, wait a minute, this makes no sense. I can see Richard Wagner standing at the gates of heaven. You have to let me in, he says. I wrote Parsifal. It has to do with the Grail, Christ, suffering, pity, and healing, right? And they answer, well, we read it, and it makes no sense. Slam. Wagner is right, and so are they. It's another Chinese finger trap. Or perhaps I'm missing the point. What we have here is a Zen paradox. That which makes no sense makes the most sense. I am being caught in a sin of the highest magnitude, using Aristotelian two-value logic. A thing is either A or not A, the law of the excluded middle. Everybody knows that Aristotelian two-value logic is fucked. What I am saying is that if Kevin were here, he'd say, deedle-deedle queep, which is what he says to Fat when Fat reads aloud from his exegesis. Kevin has no use for the profound. He's right. All I am doing is going deedle-deedle queep over and over again in my attempts to understand how Horselover Fat is going to heal, save Horselover Fat. Because Fat cannot be saved. Healing Sherry was going to make up for losing Gloria, but Sherry died. The death of Gloria caused Fat to take 49 tablets of poison, and now we are hoping that upon Sherry's death he will go forth, find the Savior, what Savior, and be healed. Healed of a wound that prior to Sherry's death was virtually terminal for him. Now there is no Horselover Fat. Only the wound remains. Horselover Fat is dead, dragged down into the grave by two malignant women, dragged down because he is a fool. That's another nonsense part in Parsifal, the idea that being stupid is salvific. Why? In Parsifal, suffering gave the timid fool purest knowledge of might. How? Why? Please explain. Please show me how Gloria's suffering and Sherry's suffering contributed anything good to Fat, to anyone, to anything. It's a lie. It's an evil lie. Suffering is to be abolished. Well, admittedly, Parsifal did that by healing the wound. Amfortas's agony ceased. What we really need is a doctor, not a spear. Let me give you entry 45 from Fat's tractate. 45. In seeing Christ in a vision, I correctly said to him, we need medical attention. In the vision there was an insane creator who destroyed what he created without purpose, which is to say, irrationally. This is the deranged streak in the mind. Christ is our only hope, since we cannot now call on Asclepius. Asclepius came before Christ and raised a man from the dead. For this act, Zeus had a Cyclopes slay him with a thunderbolt. Christ also was killed for what he had done, raising a man from the dead. Elijah brought a boy back to life and disappeared soon thereafter in a whirlwind. The empire never ended. 46. The physician has come to us a number of times under a number of names, but we are not yet healed. The empire identified him and ejected him. This time he will kill the empire by phagocytosis. In many ways, Fat's exegesis makes more sense than Parsifal. Fat conceives of the universe as a living organism into which a toxic particle has come. The toxic particle, made of heavy metal, has embedded itself in the universe organism and is poisoning it. The universe organism dispatches a phagocyte. The phagocyte is Christ. It surrounds the toxic metal particle, the black iron prison, and begins to destroy it. 41. The empire is the institution, the codification of derangement. It is insane and imposes its insanity on us by violence, since its nature is a violent one. 42. To fight the empire is to be infected by its derangement. This is a paradox. Whoever defeats a segment of the empire becomes the empire. It proliferates like a virus, imposing its form on its enemies. Thereby it becomes its enemies. 43. Against the empire is posed the living information, the plasmate or physician, which we know as the Holy Spirit, or Christ discorporate. These are the two principles, the dark, the empire, and the light, the plasmate. In the end, mind will give victory to the latter. Each of us will die or survive according to which he aligns himself and his efforts. Each of us contains a component of each. Eventually, one or the other component will triumph in each human. Zoroaster knew this because the wise mind informed him. He was the first savior. Note, Fat has left out Buddha. Perhaps he doesn't understand who and what the Buddha is. End of note. 4 have lived in all. A 5th is about to be born, who will differ from the others. He will rule, and he will judge us. In my opinion, Kevin may go deedle-deedle-queep whenever Fat reads or quotes from his tractate, but Fat is onto something. Fat sees a cosmic phagocytosis in progress, one in which in microform we are each involved. A toxic metal particle is lodged in each of us. That which is above, the macrocosm, is that which is below, the microcosm, or man. We are all wounded, and we all need a physician. Elijah for the Jews, Asclepius for the Greeks, Christ for the Christians, Zoroaster for the Gnostics, the followers of Mani, and so forth. We die because we are born sick, born with a heavy metal splinter in us, a wound like Amfortas' wound. And when we are healed, we will be immortal. This is how it was supposed to be. But the toxic metal splinter entered the macrocosm and simultaneously entered each of its microcosmic pluriforms, ourselves. Consider the cat dozing on your lap. He is wounded, but the wound does not yet show. Like Sherry, something is eating him away. Do you want to gamble against this statement? Laminate all the cat's images in linear time into one entity. What you get is pierced, injured, and dead. But a miracle occurs. An invisible physician restores the cat. So everything lingers but a moment and hastens on to death. The plant and the insect die at the end of summer, the brute and the man after a few years. Death reaps unweariedly. Yet notwithstanding this, nay, as if this were not so at all, everything is always there and in its place, just as if everything were imperishable. This is temporal immortality. In consequence of this, notwithstanding thousands of years of death and decay, nothing has been lost, not an atom of the matter, still less anything of the inner being that exhibits itself as nature. Therefore, every moment we can cheerfully cry, in spite of time, death, and decay, we are still all together. Schopenhauer. Somewhere, Schopenhauer says that the cat which you see playing in the yard is the cat which played 300 years ago. This is what Fat had encountered in Thomas, in the three-eyed people, and most of all in Zebra, who had no body. An ancient argument for immortality goes like this. If every creature really dies, as it appears to, then life continually passes out of the universe, passes out of being. And so eventually all life will have passed out of being, since there are no known exceptions to this. Ergo, despite what we see, life somehow must not turn to death. Along with Gloria and Sherry, Fat had died, but Fat still lived on as the savior he now proposed to seek. 9. Wordsworth's ode carries the subtitle, intimations of immortality from recollections of early childhood. In Fat's case, the intimations of immortality were based on recollections of a future life. In addition, Fat could not write poetry worth shit, despite his best efforts. He loved Wordsworth's Ode and wished he could come up with its equal. He never did. Anyhow, Fat's thoughts had turned to travel. These thoughts had acquired a specific nature. One day he drove to Wide World Travel Bureau, Santa Ana branch, and conferred with the lady behind the counter, the lady and her computer terminal. "Yes, we can put you on a slow boat to China," the lady said cheerfully. "How about a fast plane?" Fat said. "Are you going to China for medical reasons?" the lady asked. Fat was surprised at the question. "A number of people from Western countries are flying to China for medical services," the lady said, "even from Sweden, I'm given to understand. Medical costs in China are exceptionally low, but perhaps you already know that. Do you know that? Major operations run approximately $30 in some cases." She rummaged among pamphlets, smiling cheerfully. "I guess so," Fat said. "Then you can deduct it on your income tax," the lady said. "You see how we help you here at Wide World Travel?" The irony of this side issue struck Fat forcefully, that he, who sought the fifth savior, could write his quest off on his state and federal income tax. That night, when Kevin dropped over, he mentioned it to him, expecting Kevin to be wryly amused. Kevin, however, had other fish to fry. In an enigmatic tone, Kevin said, "What about going to the movies tomorrow night?" "To see what?" Fat had caught the dark current in his friend's voice. It meant Kevin was up to something. But of course, true to his nature, Kevin would not amplify. "It's a science fiction film," Kevin said, and that was all he would say. "Okay," Fat said. The next night, he and I and Kevin drove up Tustin Avenue to a small walk-in theater. Since they intended to see a science fiction film, I felt that for professional reasons I should go along. As Kevin parked his little red Honda Civic, we caught sight of the theater marquee. "Valis," Fat said, reading the words, "with Mother Goose." "What's Mother Goose?" "A rock group," I said, disappointed. It did not appear to me to be something I'd like. Kevin had odd tastes, both in films and in music. Evidently he had managed to combine the two tonight. "I've seen it," Kevin said cryptically. "Bear with me. You won't be disappointed." "You've seen it?" Fat said. "And you want to see it again?" "Bear with me," Kevin repeated. As we sat in our seats inside the small theater, we noticed that the audience seemed to be mostly teenagers. "Mother Goose is Eric Lampton," Kevin said. "He wrote the screenplay for Valis, and he stars in it." "He sings?" I said. "Nope," Kevin said, and that was all he had to say. He then lapsed into silence. "Why are we here?" Fat said. Kevin glanced at him without answering. "Is this like your belch record?" Fat said. One time, when he'd been especially depressed, Kevin had brought over an album which he, Kevin, assured him, Fat, would cheer him up. Fat had to put on his electrostatic Stax headphones and really crank it up. The track turned out to consist of belching. "Nope," Kevin said. The lights dimmed. The audience of teenagers fell silent. The titles and credits appeared. "Does Brent Minnie mean anything to you?" Kevin said. He did the music. Minnie works with computer-created random sounds, which he calls synchronicity music. He's got 3 LPs out. I've got the second 2, but I can't find the first. "Then this is serious stuff," Fat said. "Just watch," Kevin said. Electronic noises sounded. "God," I said with aversion. On the screen, a vast blob of colors appeared, exploding in all directions. The camera panned in for a tight shot. "Low-budget sci-fi flick," I said to myself. "This is what gives the field a bad reputation." The drama started abruptly. All at once the credits vanished. An open field, parched, brown, with a few weeds here and there, appeared. "Well," I said to myself, "here is what we'll see. A jeep with 2 soldiers in it bumping across the field. Then something vivid flashes across the sky. "Looks like a meteor, Captain," one soldier says. "Yes," the other soldier agrees thoughtfully. "But maybe we'd better investigate." I was wrong. The film Valis depicted a small record firm called Maratone Records, located in Burbank, owned by an electronics genius named Nicholas Brady. The time, by the style of the cars and the particular kind of rock being played, suggested the late 60s or early 70s, but odd incongruities prevailed. For example, Richard Nixon didn't seem to exist. The President of the United States bore the name Ferris Fremont, and he was very popular. During the first part of the film, there were abrupt segues to TV news footage of Ferris Fremont's spirited campaign for re-election. Mother Goose himself, the actual rock star who in real life is rated with Bowie and Zappa and Alice Cooper, took the form of a songwriter who had gotten hooked on drugs, decidedly a loser. Only the fact that Brady kept paying him enabled Goose to survive economically. Goose had an attractive and extremely short-haired wife. This woman possessed an unearthly appearance with her nearly bald head and enormous luminous eyes. In the film, Brady schemed constantly on Linda, Goose's wife. In the film, for some reason, Goose used his real name, Eric Lampton, so the tale narrated had to do with the marginal Lamptons. Linda Lampton wasn't natural. That came across early on. I got the impression that Brady was a son of a bitch, despite his wizardry with audio electronics. He had a laser system set up which ran the information, which is to say the various channels of music, into a mixer unlike anything that actually exists. The damn thing rose up like a fortress. Brady actually entered it through a door, and inside it got bathed with laser beams which converted into sound using his brain as a transducer. In one scene, Linda Lampton took off her clothes. She had no sex organs. Damnedest thing Fat and I ever saw. Meanwhile, Brady schemed on her, unaware that no way existed by which he could make it with her, anatomically speaking. This amused Mother Goose, Eric Lampton, who kept shooting up and writing the worst songs conceivable. It became obvious after a while that his brain was fried. He didn't realize it either. Nicholas Brady began going through mystifying maneuvers, suggesting that by means of his fortress mixer he intended to laser Eric Lampton out of existence, to pave the way for laying Linda Lampton, who in fact had no sex organs. Meanwhile, Ferris Fremont kept showing up in dissolves that baffled us. Fremont kept looking more and more like Brady, and Brady seemed to metamorphose into Fremont. Scenes shot by which showed Brady at enormous gala functions, apparently affairs of state. Foreign diplomats wandered around with drinks, and a constant low murmuring hung in the background, an electronic noise resembling the sound created by Brady's mixer. I didn't understand the picture one bit. "Do you understand this?" I asked Fat, leaning over to whisper. "Christ, no," Fat said. Having lured Eric Lampton into the mixer, Brady stuck a strange black cassette into the chamber and punched buttons. The audience saw a tight shot of Lampton's head explode, literally explode. But instead of brains bursting out, electronic miniaturized parts flew in all directions. Then Linda Lampton walked through the mixer, right through the wall of it, did something with an object she carried, and Eric Lampton ran backward in time. The electronic components of his head imploded. The skull returned intact. Brady, meanwhile, staggered out of the Maratone building onto Alameda, his eyes bulging. Cut to Linda Lampton putting her husband back together, both of them in the fortress-like mixer. Eric Lampton opens his mouth to speak, and out comes the sound of Ferris Fremont's voice. Linda draws back in dismay. Cut to the White House. Ferris Fremont, who no longer looks like Nicholas Brady, but like himself, restored. "I want Brady taken out," he says grimly, "and taken out now." Two men dressed in skin-tight black shiny uniforms, carrying futuristic weapons, nod silently. Cut to Brady crossing a parking lot rapidly to his car. He is totally fucked up. Pan to black-suited men on roof, scope sights up with crosshairs. Brady seating himself and trying to start his car. Dissolve to huge crowds of young girls dressed in red, white, and blue cheerleader uniforms. But they're not cheerleaders. They chant, "Kill Brady! Kill Brady!" Slow motion. The men in black fire their weapons. All at once, Eric Lampton stands outside the door of Maratone Records. Close shot of his face. His eyes turn into something weird. The men in black char into ashes. Their weapons melt. "Kill Brady! Kill Brady!" Thousands of girls dressed in identical red, white, and blue uniforms. Some strip off their uniforms in sexual frenzy. They have no reproductive organs. Dissolve. Time has passed. 2 Ferris F. Fremonts sit facing each other at a huge walnut table. Between them, a cube of pulsing pink light. It's a hologram. Beside me, Fat grunts. He sits forward, staring. I stare, too. I recognize the pink light. It's the color Fat described to me, regarding zebra. Scene of Eric Lampton nude in bed with Linda Lampton. They strip off some kind of plastic membrane and reveal sex organs underneath. They make love. Then Eric Lampton slides out of bed, goes into living room, shoots up whatever dope he's strung out on, sits down, puts his head wearily down. Dejection. Long shot. The Lamptons' house below. Camera is what they call camera 3. A beam of energy fires at the house below. Quick cut to Eric Lampton. He jerks as if pierced, holds his hands to his head, convulsing in agony. Tight shot of his face. His eyes explode. The audience with us gasps, including me and Fat. Different eyes replace the ones which exploded. Then, very slowly, his forehead slides open in the middle. A third eye becomes visible, but it lacks a pupil. Instead, it has a lateral lens. Eric Lampton smiles. Segue to recording session, some kind of folk rock group. They are playing a song that really turns them on. "I never heard you write like this before," a board man says to Lampton. Camera dollies in on speakers. Sound level increases. Then cut to Ampex playback system. Nicholas Brady is playing a tape of the folk rock group. Brady signals to technician at the fortress-like mixer. Laser beams fire in all directions. The audio track undergoes a sinister transformation. Brady frowns, rewinds tape, plays it again. We hear words. Kill. Ferris. Fremont. Kill. Ferris. Fremont. Over and over again. Brady stops tape, rewinds it, replays it. This time the original song that Lampton wrote. No mention of killing Fremont. Blackout. No sound, no sight. Then slowly, Ferris F. Fremont's face appears with a grim expression, as if he had heard the tape. Bending, Fremont clicks on a desk intercom system. "Give me the Secretary of Defense," he says. "Get him here at once. I must talk to him." "Yes, Mr. President." Fremont sits back, opens folder. Pictures of Eric Lampton, Linda Lampton, Nicholas Brady, plus data. Fremont studies the data. Beam of pink light strikes his head from above for a split second. Fremont winces, looks puzzled. Then, stiffly, like a robot, rises to his feet, walks to a shredder marked Shredder, and drops the folder and its contents in. His expression is bland. He has totally forgotten everything. "The Secretary of Defense is here, Mr. President." Puzzled, Fremont says, "I didn't call for him." "But, sir—" Cut to Air Force Base. Missile being launched. Tight shot of document marked Secret. We see it opened. Project Valis. Voice off camera. "Valis? What's that, General?" Deep authoritative voice. "Vast active living intelligence system. You're never to—" Whole building detonates into the same pink light as before. Outdoors, missile rising, suddenly wobbles. Alarm sirens go off. Voices yelling, "Destruct alert! Destruct alert! Abort mission!" We now see Ferris F. Fremont making campaign speech at fundraising dinner. well-dressed people listening. Uniformed officer bends down to whisper in the president's ear. Aloud, Fremont says, "Well, did we get Valis?" Agitatedly, the officer says, "Something went wrong, Mr. President. The satellite is still—" Voice drowned out by crowd noises. Crowd senses something is wrong. The well-dressed people have metamorphosed to the girl cheerleaders in red, white, and blue identical uniforms. They stand motionless, like robots unplugged. Final scene. Vast cheering crowd. Ferris Fremont, back to camera, making Nixon-type V for Victory signs with both hands. Obviously, he has won re-election. Brief shots of black-clad armed men standing at attention, pleased. General joy. Some kid holds flowers to Mrs. Fremont. She turns to accept them. Ferris Fremont turns too. Zoom in. Brady's face. On the drive home, back down Tustin Avenue, Kevin said, after a period of mutual silence among the three of us, "You saw the pink light." "Yes," Fat said. "And the lateral lens third eye," Kevin said. "Mother Goose wrote the screenplay?" I asked. "Wrote the screenplay, directed it, starred in it." Fat said, "Did he ever do a film before?" "No," Kevin said. "There was information transfer," I said. "In the film?" Kevin said. "As storyline? Or do you mean from the film and audio track to the audience?" "I'm not sure I understand," I began. "There is subliminal material in that film," Kevin said. "The next time I see it, I'm taking a battery-powered cassette tape recorder in with me. I think the information is encoded in Minnie's synchronicity music, his random music." "It was an alternate USA," Fat said, "where instead of Nixon being president, Ferris Fremont was, I guess." "Were Eric and Linda Lampton human or not?" I said. "First they appeared human, then she turned out not to have any, sex organs. And then they stripped those membranes off, and they did have sex organs." "But when his head exploded," Fat said, "it was full of computer parts." "Did you notice the pot?" Kevin said. "On Nicholas Brady's desk? The little clay pot, like the one you have. The pot that girl—" "Stephanie," Fat said, "made for you." "No," Fat said. "I didn't notice it. There were a lot of details in the film that kept coming at me so fast. At the audience so fast, I mean." "I didn't notice the pot the first time," Kevin said. "It shows up in different places, not just on Brady's desk, but one time in President Fremont's office, way over in the corner, where only your peripheral vision picks it up. It shows up in different parts of the Lamptons' house, for example, in the living room. And in that one scene where Eric Lampton is staggering around, he knocks against things, and—" "The pitcher," I said. "Yes," Kevin said. "It also appears as a pitcher, full of water. Linda Lampton takes it out of the refrigerator." "No, that was just an ordinary plastic pitcher," Fat said. "Wrong," Kevin said. "It was the pot again." "How could it be the pot again if it was a pitcher?" Fat said. "At the beginning of the film," Kevin said, "on the parched field, off to one side. It only registers subliminally unless you're deliberately watching for it. The design on the pitcher is the same as the design on the pot. A woman is dipping it into a creek, a very small, mostly dried-up creek." I said, "It seemed to me that the Christian fish sign appeared on it once, as the design." "No," Kevin said emphatically. "No?" I said. "I thought so too the first time," Kevin said. "This time I looked closer. You know what it is? The double helix." "That's the DNA molecule," I said. "Right," Kevin said, grinning, "in the form of a repeated design running around the top of the pitcher." We all remained silent for a time, and then I said, "DNA memory. Gene pool memory." "Right," Kevin said. He added, "At the creek, when she fills the pitcher—" "She," Fat said. "Who was she?" A woman, Kevin said. We never see her again. We never even see her face, but she has on a long, old-fashioned dress, and she's barefoot. Where she's filling the pot or the pitcher, there's a man fishing. It's flash-cut, just for a fraction of an instant, but he's there. That's why you thought you saw the fish sign, because you picked up the sight of the man fishing. There may even have been fish lying beside him in a heap. I'll have to look really hard at that when I see it again. You saw the man subliminally, and your brain, your right hemisphere, connected it with the double helix design on the pitcher. The satellite, Fat said. Valis. Vast active living intelligence system. It fires information down to them? It does more than that, Kevin said. Under certain circumstances, it controls them. It can override them when it wants to. And they're trying to shoot it down, I said, with that missile? Kevin said, the early Christians, the real ones, can make you do anything they want you to do, and see, or not see, anything. That's what I get out of the picture. But they're dead, I said. The picture was set in the present. They're dead, Kevin said, if you believe time is real. Didn't you see the time dysfunctions? No, both Fat and I said in unison. That dry, barren field, that was the parking lot Brady ran across to get into his car when the two men in black were stationed and ready to shoot him. I hadn't realized that. How do you know? I said. There was a tree, Kevin said, both times. I saw no tree, Fat said. Well, we'll all have to go see the picture again, Kevin said. I'm going to. 90% of the details are designed to go by you the first time. Actually, only go by your conscious mind. They register in your unconscious. I'd like to study the film frame by frame. I said, then the Christian fish sign is Crick and Watson's double helix, the DNA molecule where genetic memory is stored. Mother Goose wanted to make that point. That's why Christians, Kevin agreed, who aren't human beings, but something without sex organs designed to look like human beings. But on closer inspection, they are human beings. They do have sex organs, and they make love. Even if their skulls are full of electronic chips instead of brains, I said. Maybe they're immortal, Fat said. That's why Linda Lampton is able to put her husband back together, I said. When Brady's mixer blew him up, they can travel backward in time. Kevin, not smiling, said, right. So now can you see why I wanted you to see Valis? He said to Fat. Yes, Fat said somberly, in deep introspection. How could Linda Lampton walk through the wall of the mixer? I said. I don't know, Kevin said. Maybe she wasn't really there, or maybe the mixer wasn't there. Maybe she was a hologram. A hologram, Fat echoed. Kevin said, the satellite had control of them from the get-go. It could make them see what it wanted them to see. At the end, where it turns out that Fremont is Brady, no one notices. His own wife doesn't notice. The satellite has occluded them, all of them, the whole fucking United States. Christ, I said. That hadn't dawned on me yet, but the realization had been coming. Right, Kevin said. We see Brady, but obviously they don't. They don't realize what's happened. It's a power struggle between Brady and his electronic know-how and equipment, and Fremont and his secret police. The men in black are the secret police. And those broads who look like cheerleaders, they're something on Fremont's side, but I don't know what. I'll figure it out next time. His voice rose. There's information in Minnie's music. As we watch the events on the screen, the music... Christ, it isn't music. It's certain pitches at specific intervals, unconsciously cues us. The music is what makes the thing into sense. Could that huge mixer actually be something that Minnie really built? I asked. Maybe so, Kevin said. Minnie has a degree from MIT. What else do you know about him? Fat said. Not very much, Kevin said. He's English. He visited the Soviet Union one time. He said he wanted to see certain experiments they were conducting with microwave information transfer over long distances. Minnie developed a system where... I just realized something, I broke in. On the credits, Robin Jameson, who did the still photography, I know him. He took photos of me to go with an interview I did for the London Daily Telegraph. He told me he covered the coronation. He's one of the top still photographers in the world. He said he was moving his family to Vancouver. He said it's the most beautiful city in the world. It is, Fat said. Jameson gave me his card, I said, so I could write to him for the negatives after the interview was published. Kevin said he would know Linda and Eric Lampton, and maybe Minnie, too. He told me to contact him, I said. He was very nice. He sat for a long time and talked to me. He had motor-driven cameras. The noise fascinated my cats. And he let me look through a wide-angle lens. It was beyond belief, the lenses he had. Who put up the satellite? Fat said. The Russians? It's never made clear, Kevin said. But the way they talk about it, it didn't suggest the Russians. There's that one scene where Fremont is opening a letter with an antique letter opener. All of a sudden you have that montage. Antique letter opener, and then the military talking about the satellite. If you fuse the two together, you get the idea. I got the idea. The satellite is real old. That makes sense, I said. The time dysfunction, the woman in the old-fashioned long dress, barefoot, dipping water from the creek with a clay pitcher. There was a shot of the sky. Did you notice that, Kevin? The sky, Kevin murmured. Yes, it was a long shot, a panorama shot. Sky, the field. The field looks old, like maybe in the Near East, like in Syria. And you're right, the picture reinforces that impression. I said, the satellite is never seen. Wrong, Kevin said. Wrong? I said. 5 times, Kevin said. It appears once as a picture on a wall calendar, once briefly as a child's toy in a store window, once in the sky, but it's a flash cut. I missed it the first time. Once in diagram form, when President Fremont is going through that packet of data and photos on the Maritone Record Company. I forget the 5th time now. He frowned. The object the taxi runs over, I said. What? Kevin said. Oh, yeah. The taxi speeding along West Alameda. I thought it was a beer can. It rattled off loudly into the gutter. He reflected, then nodded. You're right. It was the satellite again, mashed up by being run over. It sounded like a beer can. That's what fooled me. Minnie again. His damn music or noises, whatever. You hear the sound of a beer can, so automatically you see a beer can. His grin became stark. Hear it, so you see it. Not bad. Although he was driving in heavy traffic, he shut his eyes a moment. Yeah, it's mashed up, but it's the satellite. It has those antennae, but they're broken and bent. And, shit, there are words written on it, like a label. What did the words say? You know, you'd have to take a fucking magnifying glass and go over stills from the flick, single-frame stills, one by one by one by one, and do some superimpositions. We're getting retinal lag. It's done through the lasers Brady uses. The light is so bright that it leaves... Kevin paused. Phosphene activity, I said, in the retinas of the audience. That's what you mean. That's why lasers play such a role in the film. Okay, Kevin said when we had returned to Fat's apartment. Each of us sat with a bottle of Dutch beer, kicking back and ready to figure it all out. The material in the Mother Goose flick overlapped with Fat's encounter with God. That's the plain truth. I'd say that's God's truth, but I certainly didn't think then, that God had anything to do with it. The great Punta works in wonderful ways, Kevin said, but not in a kidding tone of voice. Fuck. Holy fuck. To Fat, he said, I just assumed you were crazy. I mean, you're in and out of the rubber lockup. Cool it, I said. So I take in Valis, Kevin said. I go to the movies to get away for a little while from all this nutso garbage that Fat here lays on us. There I am, sitting in the goddamn theater watching a sci-fi flick with Mother Goose in it, and what do I see? It's like a conspiracy. Don't blame me, Fat said. Kevin said to him, You're going to have to meet Goose. How am I going to do that? Fat said. Phil will contact Jameson. You can meet Goose, Eric Lampton, through Jameson. Phil's a famous writer. He can arrange it. To me, Kevin said, You have any books currently optioned to any movie producer? Yes, I said. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And also 3 Stigmata. Notes. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Doubleday, 1968. The 3 Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch. Doubleday, 1964. End of notes. Fine, Kevin said. Then Phil can say maybe there's a film in it. Turning to me, he said, Who's that producer friend of yours, the one at MGM? Stan Jaffley, I said. Are you still in touch with him? Only on a personal basis. They let their option on Man in the High Castle lapse. Note, The Man in the High Castle, G.P. Putnam's Sons, 1962. End of note. He writes to me sometimes. He sent me a huge kit of herb seeds one time. He was going to send me a huge bag of peat moss later on, but fortunately he never did. Get in touch with him, Kevin said. Look, Fat said, I don't understand. There were... He gestured. Things in Valis that happened to me in March of 1974, when I... Again he gestured and fell silent, a perplexed expression on his face. Almost an expression of suffering, I noticed. I wondered why. Maybe Fat felt that it reduced the stature of his encounter with God, with Zebra, to discover elements of it cropping up in a sci-fi movie starring a rock figure named Mother Goose. But this was the first hard evidence we had had that anything existed here, and it had been Kevin who could disintegrate a scam with a single bound that had brought it to our attention. How many elements did you recognize? I said, as quietly and calmly as I could, to the dejected-looking Horselover Fat. After a time, Fat pulled himself erect in his chair and said, Okay. Write them down, Kevin said. He brought out a fountain pen. Kevin always used fountain pens, the last of a vanishing breed of noble men. Paper, he said, glancing around. When paper had been brought, Fat began the list. The third eye with the lateral lens. Okay. Nodding, Kevin wrote that down. The pink light. Okay. The Christian fish sign, which I didn't see, but which you say was double helix, Kevin said. Same thing, I said, apparently. Anything else? Kevin asked Fat. Well, the whole goddamn information transfer. From Valis. From the satellite. You say it not only fires information to them, but it overrides them and controls them. That, Kevin said, was the whole point of the film. The satellite took... Look, here's what the picture was about. There is this tyrant obviously based on Richard Nixon called Ferris Fremont. He rules the USA through those black secret police. I mean, men in black uniforms carrying scope sight weapons, and those fucking cheerleader broads. They're called fappers in the film. I didn't get that, I said, when I saw it. It was on a banner, Kevin said, marginally. Fappers. Friends of the American people. Ferris Fremont's citizen army. All alike and all patriotic. Anyhow, the satellite fires beams of information and saves Brady's life. You did get that. Finally, the satellite arranges for Brady to replace Fremont at the very end when Fremont has won re-election. It's really Brady who's president, not Fremont. And Fremont knows. There was the scene of him with the dossier of pictures of the people at Maratone Records. He knew what was happening, but he couldn't stop it. He gave orders for the military to bring down Valis, but the missile wobbled and had to be destroyed. Everything was done by Valis. Where do you think Brady got his electronics knowledge in the first place? From Valis. So when Brady became president as Ferris Fremont, it was really the satellite which became president. Now who or what is the satellite? Who or what is Valis? The clue is the ceramic pot, or the ceramic pitcher, same thing. The fish sign, which your brain has to assemble from separate pieces of information. Fish sign, Christians. Old-fashioned dress on the woman. Time dysfunction. There is some connection between Valis and the early Christians, but I can't make out what. Anyhow, the film alludes to it elliptically. Everything is in pieces, all the information. For example, when Ferris Fremont is reading the dossier on Maratone Records, did you have time to scan any of the data? No, Fat and I said. He lived a long time ago, Kevin said hoarsely, but he is still alive. It said that? Fat said. Yes, Kevin said. It said that. Then I'm not the only one who encountered God, Fat said. Zebra, Kevin corrected him. You don't know it was God. You don't know what the fuck it was. A satellite? I said. A very old, information-firing satellite? Irritably, Kevin said, they wanted to make a sci-fi flick. That's how you would handle it in a sci-fi flick if you had such an experience. You ought to know that, Phil. Isn't that so, Phil? Yes, I said. So they call it Valis, Kevin said, and make it an ancient satellite that's controlling people to remove an evil tyranny that grips the United States, obviously based on Richard Nixon. I said, are we to assume that the film Valis is telling us that Zebra, or God, or Valis, or three-eyed people from Sirius removed Nixon from office? Yep, Kevin said. To Fat, I said, didn't the three-eyed Sybil you dreamed about talk about conspirators who had been seen and would be taken care of? In August 1974, Fat said. Kevin harshly said, that's the month and year Nixon resigned. Later, as Kevin was driving me home, the two of us talked about Fat and about Valis, since presumably neither of them could overhear us. The opinion Kevin copped to was that all along he had taken it for granted that Fat was simply crazy. He had seen the situation this way. Guilt and sorrow over Gloria's suicide had destroyed Fat's mind, and he had never recovered. Beth was a tremendous bitch, and married to her out of desperation, Fat had become even more miserable. At last, in 1974, he had totally lost it. Fat had begun a lurid schizophrenic episode to liven up his drab life. He had seen pretty colors and heard comforting words, all generated out of his unconscious, which had risen up and literally swamped him, wiping out his ego. In that psychotic state, Fat had flailed around, deriving great solace from his encounter with God as he had imagined it to be. For Fat, total psychosis was a mercy. No longer in touch with reality in any way, shape, or form, Fat could believe that Christ himself held Fat in his arms, comforting him. But then Kevin had gone to the movies, and now he was not so sure. The Mother Goose flick had shaken him up. I wondered if Fat still intended to fly to China to find what he termed the fifth savior. It would seem that he need go no farther than Hollywood, where Valis had been shot, or, if that was where he would find Eric and Linda Lampton, Burbank, the center of the American recording industry. The fifth savior, a rock star. When was Valis made? I asked Kevin. The film or the satellite? The film, of course. Kevin said 1977. And Fat's experience took place in 1974. Right, Kevin said. Probably before work began on the screenplay, from what I can piece together from reviews I've read on Valis. Goose says he wrote the screenplay in 12 days. He didn't say exactly when, but apparently he wanted to go into production as soon as possible. I'm sure it was after 1974. But you really don't know. Kevin said, you can find that out from Jameson, the still photographer. He'd know. What if it happened at the same time, March 1974? Beats the fuck out of me, Kevin said. You don't think it really is an information satellite, do you? I said. That fired a beam at Fat? No, that's a sci-fi film device, a sci-fi way of explaining it. Kevin pondered. I guess. But there were time dysfunctions in the film. Goose was aware that somehow time's involved. That really is the only way you can understand the film. The woman filling the pitcher. How'd Fat get that ceramic pot? Some broad gave it to him? Made it. Fired it and gave it to him, around 1971, after his wife left him. Not Beth. No, some earlier wife. After Gloria's death. Yes. Fat says God was sleeping in the pot, and came out in March 1974. The theophany. I know a lot of people who think God sleeps in pot, Kevin said. Cheap shot. Well, so the barefoot woman was back in Roman times. I saw something tonight in Valis I didn't see before that I didn't mention. I didn't want Fat to fizzle around the room like a firecracker. In the background, while the woman was by the creek, you could see indistinct shapes. Your still photographer friend Jameson probably did that. Shapes of buildings. Ancient buildings from, say, around Roman times. It looked like clouds, but there are clouds and there are clouds. The first time I saw it, I saw clouds, and the second time, today, I saw buildings. Does the goddamn film change every time you see it? Holy fuck, what a thought. A different film each time. No, that's impossible. I said, so is a beam of pink light that transfers medical information to your brain about your son's birth defect. What if I told you that there may have been a time dysfunction in 1974, and the ancient Roman world broke through into our world? You mean as the theme in the film? No, I mean really. In the real world? Yep. End of Side 4. Change side selector switch. This book is continued on the next cassette.